Hi, and welcome to Fireside AI. My name's Catherine Breslin, and I'm here to talk about how companies build AI technology. Hi, today I'm joined by Shawn Wen from PolyAI. Shawn, welcome to the show.
Hi, this is Shawn.
Great to have you with us today, Shawn. So, some of the listeners presumably have not encountered you before, so let's kick off and just ask, who are you and PolyAI? Tell us a bit about your background.
Cool, yeah. So my name is Shawn Wen, co-founder and CTO of PolyAI. So PolyAI is working on automating phone calls for contact center centers. We've been doing this like 7, 8 years now. It has been a while, and it has a lot of fun as well. And my role is really heading up the product and engineering team at Poly.
And so PolyAI is going since 2017. You launched, right? Which is a few years now, and you've grown. And last year raised Series C funding, which is great. Congratulations!
Thank you.
And so I'd love to take us back to the beginning. The very early days of PolyAI. What was it like at the beginning? Tell us a bit about that experience.
Yes, there's like certain history of our time, kind of like well, not really overlapping, but like we've been through the same group in Cambridge previously.
Yeah, and that's where both of us met, right? The
Right.
same
Yeah.
research group at
Yeah,
Cambridge.
yeah. So in research group Cambridge, that the dialogue system group working under Professor Steve Young, and I was one of his last students. Because he was about to retire at the time. He has achieved a lot in his career, as you know.
Yeah, Steve is
And
very,
CEO and
very great.
entrepreneur, pro-vice chancellor of Cambridge, and then done really good, amazing research in speech and the dialogue system field. And yeah, I was like one of his last three students, and the other two are my co-founders now. So that's kind of like how we started really. And yeah, so I met my co-founder Eddie back in Taiwan. So we are both Taiwanese, and then we came to Cambridge to study our PhD with Steve, and that's how we met Nicola, our CEO and co-founder right now. Yeah, so like we met together, we did research together, have fun in uni, having a lot of drinks like your student does in UK. And then we decided to start a bit business after that. We just continue to do what we are doing already, which is, dialogue systems now have a much more fancier name, conversational AI. Since then, it has been like, you know, in the past 7, 8 years, building the product and team.
And how did you come across that initial, like the customer service idea? Where did that come from?
Yeah, it's a great question. We are three PhD students, so we all come from technical background. And in the early days, you remember like Steve did a lot of PunkDP based assistance, like about understanding noisy speech in the car and be able to take actions on it. That was like a major thing in that early stage of the entire conversation system because people are basically trying to find what's the use case, what's the most, promising scenario to apply these kind of systems. And we started doing restaurant reservation for some reason because we have this Cambridge restaurant data set. Everyone just would working on it because back at that time, it was so difficult to collect data. So then, like we just continue to reuse that data. And in fact, we actually started in the restaurant domain, not really in the customer service domain. Well, kind of customer service as well, because when we try to sell our first product, our system was built about understanding restaurant queries and what people wanted to do in restaurant, like cancel, make a reservation, whatever. And then we started to talking to these outsourced contact center in Heifer, actually. And then they have been basically taking book table reservations for some of the large UK restaurant chains, like Beefeaters, Whitbread, some Green King pubs as well. So then we started talking to them, working with them, and then over time there was like, oh, like we have a lot of like labor shortage issues, and we cannot staff people for seasonality reasons, and then the churn rate is very high because usually like graduate, coming work for 6 months time and then left for the next job. So there was a lot of problem there. So they were like, okay, like, how about let's try to automate some codes and can you convince your clients that let us to use AI to take over some codes? It was really, really long sales cycle because, at that time people don't trust in voice assistant because obviously Siri, Google Assistant didn't actually do it very well. So then we managed to convince the client, started with a three pilot restaurants. And then I remember the launch day, like everyone is, in front of the dashboard listening to calls. There was just like maybe like one, two calls every 10 minutes. But then when people hear that, people are super excited and, was like, celebrating in the office. That was a very, very, very fun period of time. So we started with that and then rolled out to more and more restaurants and then prompted us started to look more into contact centers as well.
Yeah, I definitely remember working on that restaurant domain problem during my my postdoc time. And so
Yeah.
it's fascinating how you managed to, take that and turn it into a business that actual people had demand for. And
Yeah.
nice to think about the early days and, that first system being built. So obviously that was back 2017, 18, many years ago. And now you've grown much, much bigger. So what's different now, would you say, about your company compared to those early days?
Yeah, I think the people like to say that company go through different stages as they gradually grow up in from startup to scale up to like eventually a corporate. I think that I do actually see that different phase of a company growing is like super different. I remember in the early days when the three of us just started the business, when we started hiring, I think the initial maybe 5 to 8 people are all from our inner circles. We basically hire a lot of like our, friends and people we met in conferences really. So I think initial scaling is that 10 people is like really from like, our close, friends and people we know. And that kind of dynamics is actually very different because like, you kind of know each other, you kind of know how each other works and you trust each other, that kind of environment. So then there was like the very, I would say, initial year or so. And then we started to scale beyond our own group because we have a lot of researchers in the early days. We started to realize that building robust systems require engineers as well. We started to hiring engineers, front end, back end, and that's when we started to grow outside of our comfort zone. That we started to getting people from different places. I remember, like as a small company back at that time, it's so difficult to hire people. I reach out on LinkedIn, I reach out everywhere, nobody replies. And then the only thing that helps back at that time was Angel List. I think it's no longer that popular these days, but it's very interesting comparing like hiring then and hiring now. It's like huge difference. And then, so we grow that to like 20, 30 people. And then at that point, you still have a vibe of kind of like a family where during lunchtime, like people would just bring their lunch onto the table. We started to discuss a lot of different things, talking about politics and, etc. And then you get to interact with everyone. Everyone is still very close. And then as you gradually scale to like 50, 60, you still get to know everyone, but you don't hang out with everyone anymore. And then you started to know that, oh, like you have to keep a little bit of boundary sometimes. In the early days, we are like good friends with everyone, right? And then now we are 220 people now, and we have a hugely remote team. And a very big uh, uh, of our employee base is in US. So now, like, you know, interacting with people over like Zooms and Google Hangout is very common. But we still have a lot of people go to the office. But then, now if I go to the office, probably more than half of the people I don't actually interact or work with, every day. So it's, I think, a very, very kind of uh, very interesting change that, you see in different stages of a company.
Was that a deliberate decision to hire remotely rather than require people to come into the office, or was it?
Yeah, I think in the early days, we are very much of a office culture. I think that, Nicola is especially like, really like pushing for the office culture. And I think that it manages to actually build a very strong culture back at that time. But, since COVID hits, it just becomes impossible. And then we started to realize, oh, engineers working from home is actually quite productive, because it's like no meetings, no like, people around. So they can focus a lot more. So that gradually relaxed our constraint. Also because we expanded to US and we hire initial hires of like US talents that we kind of hiring from them from everywhere. Because initially it's the go-to-market team, so it's like sales and marketing. They usually don't come to the office. Even before COVID, they are predominantly remote because they have to travel a lot and things a lot. So then we kind of started hiring the team there. Then they just become completely, remote. And then, I mean, afterwards, now we have a office in New York. We have an office in San Francisco. There's still like cluster of people around there, but then we don't force people to come to the office. If people wanted to come to the office, then they can go there by themselves.
So you mentioned about sales and marketing and your three technical co-founders. How did you manage to hire those, first roles that weren't technical?
Very difficult. Very difficult. I think we initially, like maybe a lot of the technical founders would say, is that you try to hire professionals to do the job for you. The reality is that it never worked. Like we have the initial thought about that. So we hire the first product person, we hire the first salesperson, and then we hope them they can just do that part of the job for us. But it didn't work out because the technology is too complicated. And a lot of times the way that we sell our product requires a lot of education to the customers about like technology, how it works, but also about like what does it mean for them? How can this help their, business in the first place? I think that in order to do that translation, it requires too much context and too much understanding. And it's very difficult for just hire someone and then be able to place them in and then they can do the job for you. Over time, we realize that we always need to do that job first. Like, for example, Nicola jumped into doing sales himself and then he figured out, okay, how does a sales org work? Because like even if he wanted to step away being the manager of the team, he still need to know like how individual sales process work and then how to build a process that actually really tailor to each individual person in the organization. So in short is that what we realize that we just need to jump in to do all the jobs ourselves first and we can scramble a little bit. It's okay. We don't need to be perfect. But once you learn the job, as over time, you need to find someone who is actually a lot stronger than doing that job for you and then put them in place. But I think founder really need to get their hands dirty at the first.
So doing it yourself helps you really understand what you're looking for in that person that you're
That's
hiring
right.
to replace you to be the
Hiring,
stronger.
because in order to hire the right person, you need to do the job and feel the pain yourself. And then you can realize, okay, what kind of personality, what kind of skills that I need to hire. Because a lot of times, when founder hire their first sales or product, we will make a wish list that is as long as like, your Christmas shopping list. But then, over time, you will have to realize, okay, like this kind of person doesn't exist and you just need to strike out all the unnecessary criteria and then like just like have like okay top 3 criteria I'm looking for per person.
So obviously a lot has changed in the past 8 years. You said you've
Yeah.
grown to 220 people, but can you look back and say, is there anything that hasn't changed that you say, oh yes, we still have that in our company that was there
Yeah.
at the beginning?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think it's the culture, which is PolyAI's culture is very strong. And it's very strong because of the initial phase of that very strong in-office culture, very strong like friend connections, very strong in a way that we founders or our managers don't actually just behave like managers. We're actually just working with the people together and we will crack jokes together. And I would encourage the people, if they are not happy with me, they can just directly come to me and provide me the feedback as well. Because, I like that kind of two-way communication in the early days. So just encourage that behavior. And so therefore, like we get along really well, especially with a couple of employees we hired early days. And then they also done well and then being promoted into the leadership role later on as well. So because of that initial group of people, we build with a very strong culture. And even during, even past COVID, because everyone becomes remote, we still keep that culture around. And then as they got promoted to different roles and different departments at different positions, they kind of carry that culture with them. And then they hire the people with a similar kind of like the cultural affinity. And I think culture is an interesting thing, is that it works like a snowball. Once it becomes a snowball, it's unstoppable basically. But that means that it's a double-edged sword. If you didn't actually do it well in the early days, then it's going to become a big product problem for you. We were lucky in that regard that we did it quite well. So that now I'm very confident sitting here and say that culture is never the problem of us. we
But did you deliberately set out to build that sort of culture, or is it just a product of the way that you were
I
working
think
together? And
it's not like strategic. We never had a strategic thinking about what the culture should be, but we have certain kind of opinions along the way, more tactical about like what kind of culture that it shouldn't be. So like, for example, I think, we did actually write down our cultural values from the very early days. And then there are a couple of cultural values I emphasize a lot. And I think one thing is about radical candor. And that is like, I've been basically, telling people to read a book. Like radical candor is very important because I think one phenomenon I see in the team is that because our team is like hugely international, and because it's an international workplace, we have a lot of people coming from different culture. And then some cultures are much more like implicit in terms of sharing their feelings and things like that. Some cultures are much more like, to your face, that kind of conversation. And we saw a lot of frictions happening in the early days just because of like people don't understand each other's culture. I think radical candor is really good for that kind of environment because you just try to ground people on the same communication protocol. Is that, hey, just be direct, but like don't assume attention, well, emotions attached to it, because that's not productive. Always try to interpret people from a positive note, but then please be as the direct as possible. And I found that it's quite difficult for some people, but I think over time, once we build that up, it's just become a lot easier to manage, later on, because people would just like directly tell you how they feel rather than, have you guessing what they're thinking.
yeah, it sounds like having that diversity of people and cultures in at the beginning helped shape the culture in a really good way
It
to
is
lead
as
you to
well.
where you are
Yeah, totally,
today.
totally. Yeah, because initially you just need to work with those kind of like international background, and therefore, like when you're thinking about introducing values and culture, it is something that you immediately think about.
So let's talk about your role specifically as the company grows. As CTO, what have you seen change the most in your role, and what have you had to learn as time goes
Yeah,
on?
yeah, yeah. I think it's very interesting because I think in the early days, especially during the growth period, you do actually wonder what is the role of a CTO. Because CTO, I mean, if a CTO is a big company, it's very clearly what it is. A CTO in a small startup sometimes quite difficult to interpret because I remember in the early days when there was like a couple of us, like uh, as a CTO, I did a lot of coding in the early days, right? But then because of that chief technology title, let you feel that you need to be the best at technology, comparing to the others. So actually spending a lot of time learning what is Kubernetes security, like all these kind of stuff. But then it's just not my forte, like I'm from machine learning and AI background. I know what I know, but there's a lot of things I don't know. So I think the first phase of that growth for me was to put aside that chief title a little bit just like, hey, like it doesn't mean anything to me. I am in the early days, I would consider myself more of a co-founder and CTO, right? And a co-founder title means that no matter what your actual title is, you just need to do whatever it takes to make the company successful, right? So despite like I was the CTO title, but I did a lot of ML research and etc. I jumped in to understand a lot of Kubernetes and how these services works. I go into meet with the clients and then try to pitch them their products as well. I do investment calls with Nicholas as well together. As a company, it gradually shifted to become more mature, where we place all the department heads and the important people in the organization to run those functions. Then CTO's role becomes more prominent to me, right? But then currently under me, I still have product and engineering under me. I would say, despite that my title now is CTO, but I'm leaning more towards product currently. The reason is because I think the engineering team is very strong. So then that couple of tech leads and engineering lead to grow, and then they just managing the team there. But then now I'm doing a lot of like product thinkings because product needs me at this point. So still, I think it's still like you know, switching between different roles as well.
And I think you still have that co-founder role in your mind of doing whatever is needed. It sounds like your engineering doesn't need you as much and your product
Yeah,
does right now.
it's just like once you find someone in place to do that particular job for you, then I feel confident that this person can do a better job for me. Then I can move on to actually the other problems. So
So looking externally outside of PolyAI, obviously it's been a huge time of change in the AI industry from 2017 to today. We've seen ChatGPT, we've seen OpenAI, take Anthropic. All of these things have come along and changed the way we think about AI. So how have you taken advantage or been able to leverage what's happening outside and keep up with the rush of what's coming your way?
yeah, I think it's definitely a very exciting and challenging time you know for like for the kind of the companies that we are, because like in the early days, all our technologies are in-house. Like we build models in-house, we train models in-house, and then we realize that it's impossible to just keep up with the market movement that way, because if you have to do evaluation, retraining models while at the same time building up the product, because back at that time, so voice assistant is a very complicated technical stack. We need to do a lot of telephony integrations and reliability management of those services. Then there's also speech recognition. There's a TTS module. There's also like the entire language understanding and spoken language understanding part. So and policy management as well. So it's a lot. So just cannot keep up with that. Especially when LM started, as soon as it was announced, it was becoming very clear that the market is just going to rush to it, because like there's just like huge opportunity and people see that this is like a complete paradigm shift. That is for us as well. So at that point, we're like, okay, what we will have to unfortunately throw a lot of things away, from the things that we built in the early days. And sometimes it takes quite a lot of courage to even say it out loud. I have to tell the team that, hey, I think this is a paradigm shift. And, we are lucky and unlucky on that regard. We just need to throw away whatever we have built previously, and we have to change the way that we do things moving forward. So and then because of LM is just so competitive as a market, and there are so many different models keep shipping, we decided to take an approach where, hey, like I think technology now is moving really, really fast. All we need to do now is to keep up with the market, and then we need to use the latest model, whatever, to build our products on top. Because I think at that point, because in the early days we still have like thinking about, oh, like we are going to a full stack AI company, whatever. But then after that, we realize, okay, the market is going to start it to become more professionalized at each supply chain there. So we just need to find who we are. Like, what does PolyAI do? We build voice assistant that, end user have a conversation with. So therefore, we are at the top of the value chain, which is the application layer company. We need to embrace that identity completely. And then we have to say, no matter who have the better foundational model, we use that, right? So I think that kind of pivotal thinking to that is very important because I think a lot of companies fail to do it that way because they are too cherishing about their technology and afraid of throwing it away.
Yeah, I imagine it's really hard to throw away stuff you built because something else has come and replaced it. But it sounds like you're really smart to spot that and to figure out exactly where you needed to be to grow.
Yeah. I think, to be honest, like, to us, like the decision was difficult, but at the same time, it's also easy as well because the technology is just so much better now.
So to wrap up this conversation, I'm curious to know, what's the biggest lesson that you've learned, the thing that you would share most with people?
So I was watching Jensen's, I think one of his interviews previously. I feel the same for him as well. He said, so there was this analyst that asked him, like, now, knowing what you know right now, like Nvidia was like having a tremendous success in the past couple of years. If you go back in time, would you start the company again? Yeah, his answer was no. Because he was like, this is so hard. I didn't know that this is that hard. So like, if I go back, I might not start a company again. I think that's right because like, you know, I think a lot of people when they talk about startups, there's a lot of fantasies associated with it because the news media is just talking about all the successful stories on the market. Like, Larry Page started, Google becomes wildly successful, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, whatever. But I think people overlooked like they have gone a very long way to be that successful. And then there were a lot of people probably fighting as hard and probably as smart as them, but didn't get to that finishing line. So I would, I think this is the hardest lesson I learned is that doing startup is really, really hard. And I think if you were going to do it, you need to like really motivated by the problem. Like I'm doing the problem I really enjoy. I like AI, I like conversational assistant. So I really enjoyed it. There are several times in the past was like, oh, this is so difficult. Like why I'm doing this, but I still keep myself going because I fundamentally enjoy the product, the technology, and then the people I work with. So I think, yeah, that motivation is really important.
I think you could be really proud of what you've built, and Poly AI is
Yeah,
doing
I
brilliantly.
do, and then
Yeah,
I keep getting more and more product every day. So
fantastic. So this has been great. It's been great chatting with you. Where can we find out more about you and Poly AI?
yeah, so I'm actually having a very little social network presence in general. I think LinkedIn is like the channel, the PolyAI account is like where we post a lot of latest updates and things like that.
I will put some links in the show notes so people can find you and Poly AI. And thank you very much, Shawn, for joining me today.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
That's it for today. Thanks for listening. I'm Catherine Brisson, and I hope you'll join me again next time for Fireside AI.